It is Tuesday, January 2nd. It's a regularly scheduled select board meeting. Happy New Year, everyone. John, was this meeting properly warned?
Yes, Ian, it was properly warned.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to move to look for a motion on the minutes.
I move that we accept the minutes from the last meeting.
Great. Peter has made a motion to approve the minutes of December 19th, 2023. Is there any discussion? I think I see Franz's hand.
Yeah. I got a couple of things here.
Excellent.
Having read over the minutes, I saw a couple of things I thought were inaccurate in one way or another. On line 21, it says that the deadline for applying for petitions for town offices is February 29th, and I believe it's actually January 29th.
That is correct. And because we don't do editing of the minutes very often, usually I think what I like to do is we just make the edit clear for John, and if there is everyone's agreeable to your edits, then we'll move for as edited.
Okay.
As amended.
Yeah, that's fine. In line 72, I wouldn't want to tar Peter with remarks that I actually made, and it says that Case said these things and it was actually Reichsman who
Okay.
said those things.
That's line 72.
Yeah, just to substitute Reichsman for Case in that.
That's at the very end of line 72, case discussed.
Well, I actually don't know because I'm not looking.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it is. Okay.
And there were two places where there was just simply it struck me as possibly a spell check error. Line 118 and line 167, it talked about the motel conversation, and I believe it was intended to be the motel conversion.
Yeah, those were the potential ARPA
Yeah,
items.
so
and
it's
it was
just,
about-
it just got the wrong word in there on those two occasions.
It was 18, what was the other one? 118 and
118 and 167.
excellent. Further discussion? Look to the public, or to Zoom, don't see any. All right, board. There's been a motion to approve the minutes. Peter, would you be agreeable to modifying that motion to as amended?
Yes.
Okay, so the motion is to approve the December 19th minutes as amended. All board members in favor, please indicate with an eye.
Aye.
Aye, it's gonna carry 5-0. Okay, I'll go on to chair remarks. So I just have one chair remark, which is what we were just talking about a moment ago. Petition for town officers, RTM reps, and school board are available for people at the town clerk's office. They are due back on January 29th and by 5 p.m. I believe. And you can I believe you can either go into the town clerk's office and hand them in, or you can also drop it in the drop box, which is in the back of the municipal center if you wanted to drop it off on a day before the 29th after the offices are closed. And when we say town officers, we're referring to basically the Brattleboro Select Board. So you can run for a select board seat if you go and get your petition and get the signatures that you need and bring it back before the 29th of January. Did I miss anything?
RTM members as well?
Yeah, I was just talking about the select board, but RTM as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mentioned it at the beginning. Great, and that's all I have for chair remarks. I'll hand it over to the town manager for manager's comments.
Thanks, Ian. Reminder that we're in the middle of the FY25 budget development process. Staff is absorbing the feedback from the select board at your last meeting and incorporating that into final drafts of the budgets. I've posted notes from that discussion on the FY25 budget project page on the town website with a revised near final ARPA list and general fund alternates list. It's currently looking like we could fund up to 11 of your ARPA priorities, including 6 projects carried over from the capital fund alternates list. And the 6 remaining general fund alternates would come in at 306,000, or a total tax increase of 5.3%, but more to come on January 16th. Construction on the new water treatment plant is progressing. On December 21st, the DPW team passed a demonstration of the plant as required by the State Agency of Natural Resources, and they were given permission to flow water from the new plant to Brattleboro. Once all the equipment is completely moved over to the new plant, the old one will be demolished later this year. Finally, DPW staff have also been coordinating really well in addressing some ongoing issues from the recent storm on Class 3 roads in West Brattleboro, particularly some significant land movement on Melchin Road that has currently, the road is restricted in use. And that's all I have for tonight.
Great. Thank you very much, John. Moving on to select board comments and committee reports. Board? Liz?
Well, Happy New Year, everyone. I do notice, I see quite often people walking in the dark and they can't be seen. And as a member of the Traffic Safety Committee, I would urge you to wear something that would allow you to be visible. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. Other board members? No? Okay. We'll move on to agenda item 6, public participation. This is an opportunity for members of the public to speak on an item that's not on the warned agenda, or to request that an item that is on the consent agenda be pulled and addressed at the end of the regularly scheduled agenda. I see a hand that is just identified as user on Zoom, which is exciting beginning to the new year. So if you want to, if you can right off the bat identify yourself, because we sometimes have issues on Zoom.
Hello, I'm not an abuser user. This is Kurt Dimes, District
okay.
2. Hello.
Hi, Kurt. We
Got
can
a
hear you.
couple of
Go ahead.
comments about two important charter amendments that came to a vote and were either approved in an altered form, or yeah, that's what happened. In June, the BCS youth vote amendment overrode the governor's veto. Maybe people forgot, but the Brattleboro is now, the only city that affords voting rights and membership in the highest municipal office to 16 and 17-year-olds. We're the only people that do that. And by the way, they should get their petitions in, those young people, if they want to join the government. Although this legislation was very popular, the version that is now law does not fully represent the vote of the people in 2019. The Brattleboro Common Sense Youth Vote Amendment that was approved in 2019 included membership on the school board. This was very important to young people, and you can imagine school-aged people are they're the biggest part of their world is school. So they were much more interested in being on the school board than actually being in the representative town meeting or on the select board. But because of complications with Act 46, the school board redistricting, it was difficult to include that, and it got eliminated in the legislative process. So BCS is obliged, and I think the select board also is obliged to put onto the ballot a version of the amendment that includes the school board membership, because that was, as I'm reminding you, that was the original intent, and that was the vote of the people in March 2019. Of course, we would be eager to send you a copy of such an amendment or a revision, and Bob Fisher would, of course, want to vet that. BCS also sent in 2020 an amendment for rent control and eviction controls. This was altered before it got on the ballot. This was altered by an organization outside Brattleboro, and it ended up including the perpetual lease provision, which was very controversial and not a good idea. And because of that, it failed in the last election. But there is still a great public need for this legislation and great public interest in rent control and eviction controls. The board would serve the public by putting on the ballot an authentic version of the amendment, the way BCS drafted it and the way it was submitted to you in 2020, with revisions over the last few years. And so without the controversial perpetual lease, I hope y'all would consider putting that on the ballot. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kurt. Other people wish to speak during the public comment? Don't see any other hands in Zoom. I don't see any hands in the room. So we'll move on to agenda item 7, which is the consent agenda. John, do you want to walk us through briefly the two items there?
Yep, Ian, there's 2 items on consent tonight. If the board approves the consent agenda, it'll be ratifying the purchase of a replacement air compressor in the amount of $25,000. And the board will also be ratifying the final contract amount of $227,727 for the purchase of asphalt for the Flat Street, Frost Street, Elm Street paving project that happened last year.
Great. Thank you, John. Board members, anyone wish to pull an item from the consent agenda?
No.
All right, look for a motion then. Liz.
I move to accept the consent agenda as presented.
Liz made a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented. All board members in favor, please indicate with an aye.
Aye.
Aye. It's going to carry 5-0. Thank you. All right, move on to agenda item 8, new business A, the fire department monthly report. So I'll invite up Chief Howard and AC Kier to the presenters table.
Good evening, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
New Year.
Good evening.
This is actually our November report. I'll go over the EMS startup costs, and then I'll have the assistant chief go over the other information from the report. As you all know, we have $1,375,253 for startup costs. As of when this report was written, we have spent $360,853.33. What we have purchased so far is 1 ambulance, put down payment on two other ambulances. We've ordered the portable radios and the mobile radios for the ambulances. And pretty much that's it so far. As far as employee salaries, starting next Monday, I'm proud to say that our EMS superintendent, Billy Fritz, will be starting with us. Billy is a great addition to our staff, comes with a tremendous amount of EMS knowledge. He's a paramedic. He's been a paramedic for 21 years, has many certifications and credentials to teach, from emergency medical responder all the way to paramedic. He can teach many other classes that are required by those folks to do every 2 years to keep up their certifications. So we had a home run with finding Billy, and I look forward to you folks meeting him.
And today was his first day on the job?
No, I'm sorry, we ended up changing it till next week.
Okay. I was gonna ask how he did.
No, I can tell you after next Monday.
Okay, very good.
And I'll let AC go over the other stats for the calls.
So for November, or up to November, currently Golden Cross has billed $422,933.60 with a collected revenue of $395,366.60. So far for FY '24, 1,352 EMS calls. Average time to the scene was 4 minutes and 23 seconds. On a 90th percentile time to the scene, 8 minutes and 6 seconds. The max time to scene was 29 minutes and 16 seconds. That was held in staging for PD to secure the scene. Average time of the call is 25 minutes and 37 seconds. We transported 64% of the patients, 868. And non-transport 484, or 36% of the patients. The need for 2 ambulances was 226. The need for 3 ambulances was 22. Mutual aid was 1 time. Need for mutual aid to cover the town 5 times. And the total calls for November was 241.
Excellent. Thank you, gentlemen, for the presentation. Board members, questions or comments for the chief or AC? Franz?
Thank you, Ian. Now the 6 minutes and 25 seconds to 8 minutes and 6 seconds for a 90th percentile time for an emergency response, that strikes me as an appreciable difference, and I'm wondering if there's any identifiable ingredients into lengthening that response time for the emergencies.
I think there's a lot of different variables that go along with that. And I can't point out any one in particular. I can say that we're responding a lot for various reasons up to North Brattleboro. That seems to be a more constant response pattern right now. Now to look back, I'll have to go back and collect some data there to tell you specifically.
Okay, well, I think it would be something for at least you guys to be aware of, that, hey, we got a blip here. Is there anything that seems might have caused it?
Sure.
And now, the difference between mutual aid and mutual aid to cover. Now, mutual aid presumably means that some outside ambulance actually picked up a patient and took him to the hospital.
That's correct.
And mutual aid to cover means that didn't happen. But what did happen? Did we actually get an ambulance from somewhere else, or were they on the way here and we turned them back, or what happens in that?
A lot of times, that's because we go to a second alarm fire, and when we do that, we automatically dispatch an ambulance to cover our station. So they go there, sit to cover. We always maintain 1 ambulance available for emergencies when that happens, but we just have them there for the ability to cover 2
Okay,
calls.
so it doesn't necessarily mean we were stretched beyond our limits, it's just we wanted to make sure that somebody was always available.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. And now, under the startup costs,
Yep.
so we're getting 3 ambulances.
Mhm.
And we've allocated $666,000 for that, and we've spent $353,000, which for 1 purchase and 2 deposits. Could you remind me of the purchase price, and then how much are the deposits for?
The purchase price for the ambulance that we got was, I believe, $202,000. We had to put, I believe, $60,000 each roughly for down payment of the other 2 ambulances. And those 2 ambulances are $231,000 apiece.
You just made it. You got a couple $1,000s left over.
Yeah.
Okay, those were my questions.
Great, thanks,
Thank
Franz. Other board members? So for next steps, if people are following our fire EMS implementation project, do we have a sense for maybe when the next thing's gonna come before the board, besides just the monthly updates? I know we were talking maybe February, but I'm just curious.
Yep, we'll be here in February with,
Okay.
to go over give you a proposal for the collection and of what you folks want to set for rates. In other words, a collection policy and rates. And the other thing that we'll do at that time is set our response standard. We'll give you a recommendation of a response standard. It'll be up to you folks whether you agree with it and accept it.
Excellent. And our EMS Superintendent Fritz can be potentially available to discuss at that time.
He will be here.
Excellent. Yeah, that was my only question. So we'll open it up to the public and see if we've got questions
Sure.
there. So I'll look to the room first. See any hands in the room? And I don't see any hands on Zoom. I think we do need a motion for this one, board. Is that accurate?
A motion
Yeah.
to accept the fire department's monthly report as presented.
All right, board, there's a motion to accept the fire department's monthly report as presented. Any other discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor, please indicate with an aye.
Aye.
Aye. It's going to carry 5-0. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. All right, we're going to move on to agenda item 8, new business B, Select Board 2023-2024 goals update. So as the board will recall, on June 3rd of 2023, we had our first ever Select Board retreat, as far as I'm aware. And in that retreat meeting, we came up with a large number, over 20 goals that the board believed were important for the town. And then through a process of creating some priorities, we were able to boil it down to 5 top priorities. Even though they were all really important, we had 5 top ones. They were making the transportation center a good place to park, develop an expansive vision for the pool, finding a path forward for community safety, advancing housing initiatives, and developing the concept of safety zones. And also in that discussion, we sort of came to the agreement that the EMS decision was basically already in process. And so that's one of the reasons why it's not on this list, is that it had already been decided as a priority. And so we were making new ones in that meeting. And so what we have tonight is, we're in the new year, and John has prepared and town staff have prepared a memorandum on updating us on those goals and where we're at this moment. None of this is complete. And a lot of these goals are really a 2-year project to begin with, but I think it's important for us to check in and see what we've accomplished so far and where we've got more work to do. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to John.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. And just, I guess I'll briefly touch on each of these goals to talk a little bit about the progress that we've been making and ask the board a couple of questions at the end. There's no action requested at this time, but other than your providing feedback. So making the transportation center a good place for parking. As you know, in June, you hired a private security firm there, which has already, the feedback there has been quite positive in terms of a change in tone or change in tenor down there. It may be a little too early to draw firm conclusions, but we have seen that parking kiosk revenues at the transportation center were up 22% from July through November of 2023 over the same period in 2022. Parking permit revenues from July to November of 2023 were at 65% of total revenues for parking, which is up from 57% in the previous fiscal year. So it's a little early to tell, but we're seeing some positive trending in the parking fund. Also, I looked at police department call volume to 77 Flat Street, and I noticed that it doubled immediately after the security officers were hired. But this dropped back down to normal last quarter, so I think there was a little bit of a bump, and then it's kind of mellowing out. Most of the calls we're getting there are still things like suspicious circumstances, substance abuse related calls, or threatening behavior. I really want to call out the police department for their attention to this area, along with the security firm. I think it is having a gradual move towards your goal on this one. I would also like to note that the Department of Public Works has been contributing quite significantly on this facility as well. They have been changing our elevator contract there to get more reliable service on the elevator. They're doing a fire alarm update. They've changed the facility maintenance schedule so that there is a town staff presence 7 days a week on the property. They've cleaned up the atrium at the top, and they put that on an open-close schedule, which I think has been positive. They've been street sweeping inside the facility all summer long. But just really having someone walk the parking garage on a daily basis and coordinating with the fire department on anyone sort of being there long-term has really had a positive impact at the transportation center. They've also installed crisis prevention signs on the top deck and in the stairwell. And I think all of this is going towards your goal and doing better on the transportation center. So, the second was developing an expansive vision for the town pool. And that goal, in August, you awarded a contract to Northeast Collaborative Architects in the amount of $50,000. They have the project staff, them and town staff have been working together. They've compiled public input from the Pool Your Ideas event that happened in July. And they've also had there was a public hearing that was held, and there's been an online survey that has received 160 individual responses. So it's been a good effort of gathering in people's visions about what the pool could be. Staff expects to review conceptual designs with you sometime probably in February. It says in the memo January, but I'm looking at the schedule and seeing everything we have for January. It's more likely to come in February, I think, contingent on the agenda committee. There also are plans for at least 2 more public forums on these conceptual ideas so that you can also have feedback from the public as we get more and more details on what the pool idea, what the concepts could look like. We have put a placeholder of $2.5 million of borrowed funds for pool facility replacement in the long-term capital project plan for FY27. That, again, is totally open to like where you land with this expansive vision of the pool and what you want to end up doing there. But we wanted to make sure that it was communicated to RTM that, this is coming. We don't know what it is yet, but it's likely to be something. That's the pool. The third goal was finding a path forward for community safety. And you'll recall at your July meeting, you looked at a range of options for staff to renew progress on consideration and potential implementation of the 41 recommendations that were initially set forth in the Community Safety Review Report. You landed on alternative D, which would acknowledge that the work of the Community Safety Review done in 2020 needs to be updated some to incorporate current needs and priorities as determined through more participation from the public. We were rolling into that when we learned about Jim Baker's work with the state. He visited with you in October to discuss plans that the state government has developed to assess public safety conditions here in Brattleboro. And so we kind of put our local efforts on this a little bit on hold until we see where that effort goes. So both are kind of moving in parallel a little bit, but we're hoping that we can hear back from Mr. Baker when he concludes his work sometime in the first quarter, and then we'll revisit where you want to go with the efforts that we were working on. I will say that some of the other things that town staff have been working on are we worked with HCRS staff to develop a grant request to increase the number of social workers that are available in town for urgent mental health crisis response. And preliminarily, it looks like we may have gotten that grant, or HCRS has gotten that grant. Also, that's something you've been considering in your general fund budget development conversations about possibly supplementing that grant effort. We also brought you a camera monitoring system expansion, which you approved to expand from the transportation center to also include the intersection of Main and High Streets. That's a kind of an update on that goal. The fourth goal, advancing housing initiatives. We recently heard from Sue Fillion on Housing Action Plan update. I won't go over all of those, but, you know, the land use regulations, the neighborhood designations, things like that have been a high focus for the planning department, and the board has moved in the direction of both of those. We've also been addressing community housing needs through data collection and outreach with developers and researching housing solutions. We continue to participate in the Southeast Housing Coalition Group, as well as we've been contributing effort to several shelter-related proposals that are currently being developed. What else? The Select Board made affordable and middle-income housing one of your legislative priorities and discussed it with legislators in November. You supported a $450,000 Vermont Community Development Program grant to implement the Tri-Park infill housing project earlier this year. In December, you accepted an $845,000 VCDP grant that will support Wyndham and Windsor Housing's Green Mountain Repair Program that provides affordable home repair financing and housing counseling services to eligible homeowners. We plan to return to the Select Board with a further Housing Action Plan update in July. The final of these 5 goals that you had was developing the concept of safety zones. This is the least of these goals that's been developed so far. The use of the safety zone designation as a tool for setting expectations and changing behavior is something that we're currently researching and trying to come up with a good solution to move this goal forward. We hope to bring this forward as an agenda item sometime in the first quarter of 2024. So that is my presentation on the goals and what we've been doing. I would ask if this progress meets with your approval, or if you have any further feedback that you wish to provide.
Great. Thank you very much, John. I really appreciate the presentation. Peter?
Yeah, I was curious, if we're just gonna jump back to the transportation one and the, with us putting security guards in, and you said immediately seeing a huge bump in call volume for the police department, and then it sort of leveled out. My question is, do we know if that huge bump came because we have a security guard there who is more actively calling and doing that? Because that's really solely their job. Would that be the case there?
Yeah, that's my understanding of
Okay.
what we think is the cause.
So I just don't want to, because I sort of as presented a little bit, kind of, it's good that we had this, but it shows that we installed this thing that worked, is what I guess my point is, and that what I had suspected. So good.
Yep.
All right.
Oh, okay, further.
Nope,
Okay.
that was it.
Other board members, questions, feedback? Liz?
I just want to thank John and the town staff for acting on our priorities, and I'm fine with it as presented.
Other board members? Franz?
Thank you, Ian. So item A, the Transportation Center, I really am pleased to hear the progress that's been made and, you know, revenue increases, and apparently that means usage increases. That's really kind of what we had in mind. And so that strikes me as a useful metric of the effectiveness of the efforts that have been made. I wonder, though, are there any other metrics we should follow in assessing what we're doing or in considering implementing additional steps at some point? And also, that kind of leads to the other question of how do we know when we've succeeded? You know, what would be a way that we would say, hey, you know, everything is great and we can just continue what we're doing now, or something like that?
Yeah. I think that's a really important question. And it, just to respond direct, I don't know, did you want to keep going?
No, that's it for that item. And I hadn't really thought about it until we were hearing these results. And it just made me think, wow, that's great. You know, when do we get to declare victory?
John?
Yeah, and I don't have a great answer for that, but I would say that I think if we, next year, the select board does a retreat and this topic doesn't rise to the top of your priorities, then maybe it's done at that point. So I mean, I think it's really something that you need to be hearing from the community. Is it continue to be a sore spot, or is it something that's kind of gone back to normal?
Yeah, I think in my other thought on it is just there's also just a level of expectation in the community for public spaces, and that, you know, keeping that level of expectation at that space, even if it moves away from being a top priority of the board, but that, you know, we didn't make like the municipal center a priority, but it's important that we fix the steps out front. And like, there is continued work that's done in any of these spaces. So, but yeah, I think it's important to think about as if we do see some success, how do we move forward from it? So, did you want to keep going on your other ones, or?
Yes, you know, other people could chime in with something as well. But, you know, I think the idea that the community response is really what we're after in terms of letting people who are using the transportation center tell us that, hey, this is great, we're really happy with the way it is. I wonder if at some point, don't know when, we should do a more formal assessment of what the community thinks somehow. At least I would have that in the back of my mind for something to maybe do in the future. And also, you know, just again, looking forward, the possibility of making the transportation center a good place for other things as well is really high on my personal priority list. And, you know, we've addressed that in the budget discussions in some ways. So, you know, I'm looking forward to continuing progress so that that facility really represents something that we can be pleased with overall. Other than that, I don't know. Excuse me. Everything seems mostly okay. I mean, it seems like we're making progress. I don't have any other specifics to bring up right now.
Great, thank you, Franz. Daniel?
Yeah, thanks. So yeah, thank you for the memo, very helpful, and appreciate all of the work that's gone into, you know, moving forward on these priorities of ours. I think the one thing I would like to hear more public discussion of is the work that Mr. Baker has been up to in the last several months. I know that there was a plan to kind of move towards some kind of public events like focus groups or forums or something like that. I've spoken with Jim a couple of times, and I feel privately kind of okay with where things are at, but I think that the public needs to hear either from him firsthand or, you know, from a report that he submits to us about what's been going on and what that all means. Even if, you know, there's no findings as such, just, yeah, I think the public needs to know what's been happening with that.
Great, thank you, Daniel.
Thanks.
If I could chime in and say I absolutely agree with that it seems kind of like it's moved underground a little bit, that, you know, there's all this stuff happening, but it's not really visible, not somewhat to, I think, us, but less so to the public. It would be nice if that were a little more visible.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think for myself, I also really appreciate all the work that has gone into this year pursuing these goals. I think you know, probably community safety is one that sits a little tough for me because it was a difficult decision to put our process more on the back burner while Mr. Baker has been doing his work. I think it is an important move because there may be more opportunities that come before us after that work's done that will help in the community safety process. It didn't make it easy though to not push forward with option D. So I sit with that a little bit, you know, having read the memo, that was like one thing I took away a little bit. It was like, but I think what I wanted to focus on in my comment was just that I'm very appreciative of this process. I think setting goals in June was really helpful. I really am grateful that we're coming back and checking in on them before the next select board retreat, right? Actually seeing the progress being made is helpful. Seeing places where we're a little, we're not as far ahead as we maybe would have hoped. I think one of the things that I take away from looking at our goals that we made is the more specific we were, the easier it seems to have sort of seen things done that really progress those goals. I think all of these goals are important, and the ones that are a little broader are maybe, it's a little bit more difficult for us to have easy things that can be pushed in progressing those goals. So I think I would think about that for the select board for the 2024 goal making session, the retreat, to think about how specific you want to make. Maybe if you're too specific, then you're not being expansive enough. I don't know. So there's a balance there to be made. And I don't know. It's just worth thinking about. But besides that, yeah, I think it's really great. Liz.
I just want to comment further that I think, really was innovative for us to have the retreat. And this memo in particular, I don't think we've ever had an update to our goals to this extent before, and I really appreciate it. And it just shows that our town government is working the way it should, and that the select board sets goals and the staff works towards them.
And once we're done with this item, I think we could even probably add another thing to advancing housing initiatives with what the board votes on with
Definitely.
UDAG. Like these lists are just going to expand every month as the board does more work and municipal staff do more work. So, other comments from the board before I turn it over to the public? Franz.
So the last few comments have reminded me that I've been thinking about the goal-setting process in general, not just our specific goals that we adopted, but I agree that having that get-together last June where we took a morning and part of the afternoon and had a very free-flowing conversation, as I recall. It was different from a select board meeting, less sort of in a box and more fuzzy around the edges. And I thought that was very useful. And I really like that kind of conversation, even to the point where I wonder if we want to do that other times during the year. I don't have a specific suggestion, but, I really thought that was productive and enjoyable. So I'd look forward to other opportunities like that, potentially. And then that reminded me that the other thing that we did that I really liked and thought was productive and enjoyable was
The mission statement?
the mission no. The community safety fair that we had at the Gibson Aiken Center. I thought that was great. And there was even some sentiment at the time of, hey, let's do this again. And I guess that'll be part of our community safety process at some point, or at least it certainly could be. And I'd look forward to another event like that where we can have sort of free-flowing conversation, less restricted by a specific agenda, and where we can just talk about stuff. I like doing that.
Great. Thank you, Franz. All right, with that, I'm going to turn it to the public. I'll look for, I don't see any hands in Zoom. I'll look to, so I don't have any hands. So I think, can you, sorry, I have one other question.
Yeah.
Can you just walk me through one more time? So for the pool, are you saying, I may have just misheard you. So are you looking at RTM, this coming RTM where something would be on the agenda, or was this a year out?
Yeah, I think when we have the conversation about FY '27, that will be more the timeline that we're looking at. It could potentially accelerate into FY '26 if it's a priority for the board. But right now, we don't even have, we're far from even having alternatives to look at, let alone community feedback on what you might want to work towards.
I think the only other feedback I have on that then is I'd be curious if the discussion about funding. So I think one of the things that we heard a lot last year was we had the Living Memorial Park improvements that the pool was not an element of, and were bonding out money. Is that something where, for FY '27, if RTM wanted to move in that direction again, is there a way that those projects could be merged in how the town funds it?
No, probably not, but, and actually, I think we were penciling in FY '27 because we have a drop in our debt at that point a little bit, so that might be a better time to be borrowing again.
Okay.
Again,
It's
it's
really-
really kind of not clear yet, but we did want to just indicate to RTM this year that there's something coming on the pool. We have this placeholder figure in there. It may be less, it may be more, but it is one of the big projects that's on the horizon.
Yeah, okay, great, thank you. Board, I don't know if there's no motion required there, so any final comments? All right, well, in that case, thank you again very much, John. Really appreciate it. Thanks to Patrick as well for work on the memo. And we're going to move on to agenda item 8C, which is the Urban Development Action Grant Program potential transfer of funds to the revolving loan fund. And I will turn it over to John.
Yep,
Great.
so Brattleboro manages a revolving loan fund to support community and economic development. Monies that go into that fund are not directly derived from tax revenues. They come from federal or state funds that the town has previously been granted and has loaned out to an eligible project. One example of this was something that we did a number of years ago with the Holstein Association to build the Marlboro Graduate Center. The town secured a grant, loaned that money to the Holstein Association. They in turn repaid the loan to the town, and they gave us an investment instrument that has now matured. It's actually a little past its maturity now, and it continues to be liquid and earning interest for the town. That's one option. You could continue to have that, which we call Urban Development Action Grant or UDAG funding, continue to have that in the investment and it earning interest. Or, which is proposed here, you could transfer that to the town's revolving loan fund. So in other words, you could move this money from your savings account into your checking account. And if you want it in that checking account, which is the revolving loan fund, could be available to do some of the things that you've been talking about in your ARPA conversations and in your budget talks. So the use of the revolving loan fund is probably a good match for this funding because it is restricted in some of the same ways that there were federal restrictions on the funds that originally came into the town. Many of the projects that could be done through the revolving loan fund would be those things that you've been talking about, such as moving the potential development of town sites for housing forward, doing other things that come from the Housing Action Plan, looking at the marketing initiative and whether that could be paid from the revolving loan fund or not, things like that that you've been discussing in your meetings. So, of course, determine if you make this move of funds, determining the use of those out of the revolving loan fund continues to be the exclusive prerogative of the select board, and you would be approving any of those projects that got applied out of that funding. So that's the basic presentation on that, and we'd be looking we have a recommended motion, but
Yeah,
that's it.
great, thank you, John. I'll take the motion now that we've had a presentation. Daniel?
Yeah, I move to authorize the town manager to transfer the UDAG loan proceeds valued on December 1, 2023 at $2,320,912 into the town's revolving loan fund.
Great, thank you, Daniel. All right, board, questions, comments, discussion? I've got okay, Liz, go ahead.
I think this is a wonderful idea. The type of work that the select board has done over the years is given over about $1 million to housing developments for low and moderate income. And that in turn has leveraged a great amount of money towards housing in our community. And I also firmly believe that the economic development funds for marketing and so forth in the downtown are desperately needed and can be presented without using taxpayer money.
Great. Thank you, Liz. Franz?
Yes, thank you, Ian. So I had, well, for one thing, I had a lot to learn about all this. I didn't really feel well informed about it. So I did some reading about the revolving loan fund. It was conveniently located in our backup materials, so that was very helpful. And I came to understand that there's actually two ways of using the money that's in the revolving loan fund. One of which is as a loan, which the name of the fund would tell you is appropriate. But the other way is to actually just authorize it as a grant, and the select board has the ability to do that as it wishes, I guess. So that the loan doesn't have to be a loan, or it could be a loan that we don't expect repayment of. Maybe you could look at it that way. So that certainly provides flexibility in how those funds are used. The other question that I had initially was, well, okay, fine, so we can take this nice sum of money and put it in the revolving loan fund, but is there any place else it could go that would be a suitable and useful place to, for us to find purposes to make things happen with that money? And so far, the answer that I've gotten to is no. There isn't really any other good place to put it, that the revolving loan fund is, with considering the restrictions that are similar or the same for the place the money's coming from and the place the money would be going, and the flexibility and the ability to use this for the types of projects that we're really interested in using it for. All this adds up to me to be a really good proposal for what to do with the UDAG money and then make it available for community projects from the revolving loan fund.
Great. Thank you, Franz. Daniel, did you have your hand up? Okay, two questions. One, what's the interest that we get each year? Ballpark it?
I'll ballpark it.
Ballpark it, okay.
Less than 5%.
While John's ballparking, is there, and this is kind of to Patrick, could there foreseeably be a project or like something that came before the select board, and if we make this move, we move all this money into the revolving loan fund, is there something that could come before us that we were really interested in, but because it's been moved over to the revolving loan fund, we no longer could fund it? Had it remained UDAG and been in the savings account, we could have.
No.
There you go.
Okay, so my only other thought is, I want to know how much it is on the interest. But the other thought I had was, yep.
I'm going to say I would say it's between 70,000 and 116,000 a year.
So 85,000. What if could we just move the interest every year into the revolving loan fund?
Yes.
And treat it as an endowment.
I don't know what the benefit of keeping it intact is if it can't be. My understanding was there was no process for extracting it other than this move here. So if we want to get to that money somehow.
I was just no, I agree with that. And I don't think I'm advocating necessarily. I just, we haven't really talked about this very much. So I was thinking about it over the weekend, and maybe it just makes sense to move it all in because we can't really extract it. I was just wondering if my understanding of the revolving loan fund is it kind of goes up and down in how much we have in it because of the nature of the loan, of loaning out money and it being repaid. If that's inaccurate, not.
I think it's accurate
Yeah.
on the small scale.
Uh-huh.
I think if you look at it over, say, 10 years, it's been going down,
Yeah.
so.
And so, okay, so I guess given that, maybe I was just trying to think of creative ways for the fund to be as healthy as possible. And so, like, is it better to give it a one-time installment of a larger amount of money that could theoretically all be allocated out by the select board in like one big thing that we're really excited about? Or would it be better if we gave it an endowment essentially and just paid into it from the interest that we gain from the money that's in UDAG? Daniel.
I would submit that given that advancing housing priorities is one of the select board goals, this is an excellent way to do that. One of our few ways to do that, actually. And I guess my one question would be, so if this $2.3 million sits where it's currently sitting, and we wanted to spend, say, $500,000 of it, would that be possible?
So if yes, I think we could find a way to make that happen.
So it's extractable. Yeah. So it's not like as frozen as I think I thought it was.
I thought it was.
Pardon?
The funds aren't like we can access the funds if they're in UDAG or they're in the revolving.
Yeah, think of it in the way that John was describing it, the difference between your sort of savings account and your checking account, right? So you can withdraw money from your savings account and use that money to go buy something. It's more convenient, shall we say, to put the money in a checking account where you can write a check and there's a, easy process for making disbursements. It's also the case that the revolving loan fund is near empty. And so if any of the things that we wish that we've been regularly funding or may potentially choose to add, that fund would need a source of revenue. Sources of revenue are, as we described earlier, either state-administered CDBG grants or direct grants from the federal government, which we haven't done since this UDAG. So.
And once it goes into the revolving loan fund, it no longer accrues the interest because it's moved out of the.
It would get the same interest. It's currently sitting in some sort of, I'm going to speak incorrectly potentially, some sort of treasury bill instrument.
Yeah.
It would get the same interest that the town is earning with the rest of our bank accounts if it were to be in the RLF.
Yeah.
Which interest has been pretty good lately.
Liz.
So Patrick, are we is the money in the UDAG, could that be used for different things than the revolving loan fund identifies as the use?
No.
They're the same?
No, it's still subject to what's called the Housing and Community Development Act of 1974, which sets forth what UDAG and or CDBG funds can be used for. So for example, one of the things I know right off the bat from memory, it cannot be used for the general provisions of government. So we couldn't take this money and just say, let's run the police department for a year or two. So there are certain federal restrictions that require it to be used for things like economic development, housing. Those are all other community development related type costs. And that's the same set of guidance and restrictions that's on the RLF to begin with. So in a nutshell, it's just kind of where it goes.
Yeah. Other board members, questions, comments?
So it's a financial instrument that has matured
Yes.
and we need to do something. We need to put it somewhere.
Yeah, it just accrues more interest in where it sits now than where it will sit. And that's, I think, the only thing to consider is you lose that additional interest, but you make the funds more readily accessible and you, give more life to the revolving loan fund, which is pretty empty at the moment. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because your idea is interesting of moving the interest. But Daniel's thought that, now is the time for us to be investing in housing. although there isn't a project before us, we might want to move the interest in for now and be cautious and then wait until there's a project. But that becomes a two-step process then to move it along.
And how long does it take to move it over?
I don't imagine it takes very long,
I don't imagine it.
you know.
So we could do. we
Might
could-
take a week
we
or
could do it
two,
your
or
way.
you could disperse a check and take it to another institution and deposit it and all that kind of stuff.
Are you proposing that as an option?
I probably should have like talked to anybody about this idea before I brought it up, but I didn't. So, I mean, yeah, I don't know. I think it's taken me a little longer, I think, to fully understand the limitations and lack of limitations, honestly, on these funds. I think it was very helpful to have the revolving loan fund material and our backup material to read through, and understanding that, yeah, it's restricted, but it's restricted in a way that's like supporting economic development. It's like, you know, there's a lot of uses
There's a
that
lot of
could
different
go
things
into
you could
that.
do with it.
And so, you know, it's, and I think, yeah, and I think understanding the amount of interest it gains too is worth considering. Yeah.
And so you do have, as I mentioned, there's a few projects that are kind of before you
Yeah.
that you've been discussing, and they would have an impact either on what you did for ARPA or the tax rate. And so those are the marketing initiative. If you want to continue with that, it could potentially come out of this funding rather than out of tax dollars. The other thing was this town-owned land housing feasibility study. That could come out of this funding instead of ARPA and allow you to do other things with ARPA a little more flexibly. Same with the new funding sources to create and rehabilitate affordable and middle-income housing that you had at $250,000. Those are all things that you could consider if you put money into the revolving loan fund, but if not, it would be another two-step process to address those things.
Daniel.
Thanks. I just want to make sure I understand this correctly. So I'm looking at the Town of Brattleboro Revolving Loan Fund Plan for Use of Income, blah, blah, blah.
It's page 22.
Page 22 of the backup. Under goals and objectives, so it talks about how these goals shall be consistent with the state's expressed intent and purpose for CDBG money as outlined in statute. And so, one, it describes the goal as to improve and maintain the economic and physical environment in Brattleboro so as to enhance the quality of life for all of its citizens, particularly those of lower incomes. I gotta say, that's pretty broad, right? And then an objective to conserve, expand, and improve housing, to create and retain employment, and to improve public facilities in support of housing or economic development activities, or where there is a threat to the public health and safety. Again, I would say that is actually broader than how I have previously understood how we could use these funds. And I would suggest that even a project like a capital investment of building public bathrooms could be found to fit within that.
I think, yeah, I probably want to talk to Bob Fisher about
Yes,
it, but
certainly.
Yeah, possibly.
Yeah.
And I would add to that, Daniel, that this is a policy that was approved by the Selectboard. So if you wanted to revisit this or have us revisit this, that's another option as well.
So actually, that is an important element here. So if we move the UDAG money into this, then we could not modify the revolving loan fund language because because if we pulled money, or unless I'm misunderstanding it,
This was approved by the board, this policy document,
yeah.
and the board has the authority to change it within limits. I mean, you can't try and use the funds in a way inconsistent with the federal guidance.
Okay,
But
so it stays the same.
That's
Okay,
the state's interpretation of the federal guidance, and as Daniel points out, it's pretty broad.
It's pretty broad. Okay, okay, so we could, okay, I understand now. Yeah,
You could be more restrictive, for example. We will only fund, projects that begin with the letter B. Which would be more restrictive as long as it's not inconsistent with the federal guidance.
And that wouldn't conflict with the UDAG restrictions. That was kind of what I was getting at.
Yeah, the UDAG program has vanished or been, it's no longer operational. And it's been replaced effectively by the Community Development Block Grant
Yeah.
program, which is administered in Vermont by the state.
Okay. Okay. Daniel had.
Apparently, we had the very last, by the way, fun fact, the very last UDAG grant in the United States was this one.
Cool.
Hot damn.
The one and only Brattleboro.
One and only
The last and
I have that
last
from a
with the
very,
handout
very
Brattleboro.
good source.
and only, last and least.
Yeah. It's kind of a half thought. I mean, I guess I'm kind of thinking about like these goals and objectives, and maybe it's a request that like our town attorney takes a look at them and helps us interpret what they mean. When I've sat here and made decisions on using money from that fund, it's always been billed as housing and economic development. But a definition of those things, was never really discussed. I assume that by the time something came here, somebody was like, yeah, this feels like a really good thing to propose to the select board, and let's see if they'll do it. But, I think here, like, there's some stuff about maintaining the economic and physical environment in Brattleboro so as to enhance the quality of life for all of its citizens, particularly of those of lower incomes. That is very broad.
Do we want to think about this some more? Is that something that we're not?
Patrick just wanted to respond to that. Really.
Yeah, I want to clarify one point, which is the funds that in the end make their way into the RLF have a slightly different, there are more things you can do with them once they arrive into the RLF rather than when they're granted to the town. When the Vermont Community Development Program approves a grant application on behalf of the town of Brattleboro from Community Development Block Grant funding, it's going to be for either affordable housing or economic development. There are very, very, very few other things that the state of Vermont will use those funds for. And it's actually, it's the prerogative and the policy of the state. Once they've been loaned out, done their work, and come back and partially retained by the town, there's a slightly broader authority to use those funds. You can grant them, you can loan them, you can, it can't be inconsistent with the federal guidance, but there's a great more deal of latitude than the state of Vermont, which will say those funds are going to be used for this and this within this state. When they come back to the town, they get a slightly broader use.
Either way.
Daniel's just responding to that, and then Franz. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I think that is helpful in thinking about how those funds can be used when they come back in there. And I think maybe I want to kind of pull back to like what the decision that was in front of us today.
Yeah.
So like these funds from the UDAG, whatnot, they've done all their job and they're sitting there waiting to be used, and they can basically be used for
Fairly broadly.
Fairly broadly, this.
Yeah. And so the question is, should they just sit where they're sitting now, accruing their reasonable amount of interest, or should they go into the revolving loan fund? And I think, my understanding before 15 minutes ago was like, oh, well, they kind of need to come out of there to be used. And so long as this board is going to continue to have a goal of advancing housing initiatives, and when presented with something that we can do, seek to access those funds to do it, I don't mind them sitting there and accruing a better rate of interest. It's better for the town,
Yeah.
I actually, thinking back to a couple of years ago, these funds weren't on our radar. That one time, Patrick brought up, these funds. I was like, oh wait, there's like some number of millions of dollars just hanging out. What are the plans for that? And I want to see them be used because the town needs this kind of investment. So I don't want them to sit there unused for millions of years.
Franz.
Thank you. So with regards to just that last point, I think I agree with Daniel that I'm not as excited about using this as an endowment fund that would generate $100,000 a year that would go to this, that, or the other thing. I think it's much more productive for the town as a whole to say, yeah, that we can make a difference with these funds. So whether they're in this account or that account, and whether it takes an extra week to extract them for use, that's not such a big deal. But yes, I would like to have them available for use, as our conceptual model of what we're doing with this money. I have a question for Patrick, which is, do we have any other funds that are likely to come into the revolving loan fund at any point? I mean, have we made loans that are now going to start bringing returns to the fund? How's that going to work?
We have some long-term deferred loans, particularly for housing. Many of those are still maybe a decade out from requiring any sort of repayment. So we don't have many active loans at this point in time.
We've given a lot of grants.
Yeah, so a lot of it was grant money that we're just not going to see again.
Correct.
Okay.
I think more to the, probably on the side of moving the money into the revolving loan fund, would having more money in there, in that fund, impact basically like if a developer were to be in town, like looking at potential revenue sources, is the revolving loan fund something that they would probably be able to like look at or inquire about in a way that maybe like this last UDAG grant that ever was granted, like is it, if we're talking about encouraging economic development, is simply having the funds in the revolving loan fund going to encourage more access to those monies?
Doesn't matter.
I don't think so.
Okay. Yeah.
It's just positioning them in a place where the board can more easily make use of them. And the other thing, I mean, I'll be honest with you here, the revolving loan fund, as we say, is, if the Sevens article passes at town meeting, the revolving loan fund is all but done. And so any of the programs that feed from the revolving loan fund are therefore done, right? The small business assistance program is basically done. The rental housing improvement program is done.
Yep.
And so by positioning this money into that fund, it doesn't necessarily spend it through any of those programs, but if a hot item, a hot project comes through, hey,
Yep.
what's the balance in the revolving? Oh yeah, we got some money in there. We could do it that way. And actually, truth be told, John and I have talked about a couple of other interesting creative ideas that, if there was a source of funds, we might try and do X or Y. It just made like practical sense to us to put it in a place from which you spend, rather than in a savings account. Is really, so it doesn't have to be that. There's not an imperative. There's no, deadline looming or anything like that. But if you wish to use it for any of the things John's described, or any of the other programs for which the board is approved, or any of some other ideas that, we would bring forward, this is where we think it's a good place to sit.
Yeah, I find that very helpful, Patrick. Thank you. Yeah, especially given, that's kind of what my question was getting at, was like, yeah, are there so all of those things that feed from the revolving loan fund, if there's nothing left in it, then someone who were to like inquire of the town,
Sorry.
I see you have this, sorry, there's nothing in it.
Right.
And I guess maybe they would be like, well, can I access the UDAG fund? Like, would they know even to, yeah.
But surely in that case, you will know. You will know, oh yeah, we are out of revolving loan fund monies, but we have 2.3 million that the select board spent 30 minutes discussing that they're quite happy to spend for these purposes. It's just in a different fund. So it's not like somebody's going to be told, no, sorry, it's done. Right?
Well,
That would require some real nuance on the part of the staff who answered that question, because that question may not be posed to John or I. It's not always clear who receives the question and, oh, what's the balance in the RLF? Oh, I'm sorry, it's a zero.
It sounds to me like there's a certain amount of money that we have our eye on now from the budget and all these various programs and things that we want to do in advance of the housing program and economic development. So there should be a certain amount of money in the revolving loan fund to do that. Whether we want to take all of it or part of it, whatever that number is, we should give ourselves a generous amount so that we can continue to do the work that the select board wants to do as a priority.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Yeah, I think it makes sense to move it all in. The fact that it still accrues interest, it's not as high as where it sits now, but it still will. So it's not like we're moving it out entirely in it. Because I think like the idea of like if there were no projects or anything, and so we were just moving it from something that was accruing interest to something that wasn't, then I would be like, why are we? But if it's going to accrue some interest anyways, and interest rates are good for those town rates as well. And for all the reasons that you've laid out, that you guys have spoken on, like it feeds those programs, so those programs are now available for people to access. Yeah, it makes sense to me. But other board members? Oh, we haven't heard from the public yet either on it. So.
Let's hear from the public.
Yeah, let's hear from the public on this. Any hands in Zoom? I don't see any hands in Zoom. I'll look
in the room.
I'll look to the room. I don't see any hands in the room.
That's true.
I've managed to muddy this a bit, so.
Let's just vote on the motion, see what happens.
Yeah, I guess so, unless there's anybody else who wants to speak on it.
With it.
No? Okay, so there was a motion made to authorize the town manager to transfer the UDAG loan proceeds valued on December 1st, 2023 at $2,320,912 into the town's revolving loan fund. Board members, all those in favor, please indicate with an aye.
Aye.
It's going to carry 5-0. So in that case, I'm going to move on to, I guess.
Could I make a comment about the matter we just decided?
Comment, we just
Comment.
did it.
Yeah, I'm
No,
gonna
no.
say that I'm glad we had that discussion, even though we ended up doing exactly what we thought we would do at the beginning. Here, going through those ramifications and possible pathways was useful to me, and I'm glad you brought it up.
Well, I appreciate that, Franz. Is there a final motion?
Liz was gonna make it.
No, go ahead, Daniel.
I move to adjourn.
Daniel's made a motion to adjourn. All those in favor?
Aye.
Indicate with an aye.
Aye.
Aye, aye, aye.
Thank you very much, BCTV. Thank you so much to our interpreters. Really appreciate it.